My fingers trembled as I fidgeted with the napkin for the 10th time. The restaurant, La Rose Eternelle, was much more elegant than I had imagined. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, tables covered with impeccable white linen tablecloths, and the discreet murmur of sophisticated conversations filled the atmosphere. I felt completely out of my element, wearing my best dress, which still seemed too modest for this place, and trying to ignore the curious looks from other customers. "He should be arriving soon," I whispered to myself, checking my phone for the 20th time. No messages. My best friend, Yuna, had insisted on this blind date. "Marina, you need to get out of that library and meet people. This guy is perfect for you. Smart, successful, and looking for something serious." Against my better judgment, I had agreed. After all, at 28 years old, working as a librarian, and sharing a tiny apartment with 2 roommates, my love life was practically non-existent. The waiter passed by for the 3rd time, his eyes full of poorly disguised pity. "Would the lady like to order something while you wait?" Just water, please," I replied, feeling my cheeks burn. 45 minutes? I had been waiting for 45 minutes. I grabbed my phone again and opened messages. Still nothing from Yuna, nothing from the supposed date. I quickly typed, "Yuna, I think he's not coming. I'm leaving in 5 minutes." The response came almost instantly, "Marina, no. Give it a little more time. Traffic is horrible." I sighed deeply. 5 more minutes. Then, I could endure 5 more minutes of humiliation. I started to grab my purse when I felt an imposing presence beside me. I looked up and almost dropped my purse. A tall man, probably in his early 50s, wearing a perfectly tailored suit, was standing there. His gray hair was impeccably combed, and his dark eyes observed me with an intensity that made me swallow hard. There was something about him that exuded power and authority, the kind of presence that makes an entire room fall silent. "Are you the one my son mentioned?" he asked, his voice deep and controlled, but with a touch of urgency that caught me off guard. I blinked, completely confused. Excuse me?" He pulled out the chair in front of me and sat down without asking permission, his eyes never leaving my face. "Your name is Marina, right?" "Marina Costa." My heart began to beat faster. How did he know my name? "Yes, but I don't understand." "My name is Richard Park," he interrupted, and I felt my stomach drop. Park. That name was impossible not to recognize in our city. Park Industries was one of the largest conglomerates in the country, controlling everything from technology to real estate. And Richard Park was the legendary CEO, known for his business acumen and ruthless nature. His photo appeared regularly in business magazines that occasionally passed through the library. I know who you are," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't understand what's happening." Richard Park leaned forward, his fingers interlaced on the table. "My son, Daniel, was supposed to be here. This was his blind date." The world seemed to stop. "Daniel Park was my blind date?" He nodded slowly. "But he can't come. There was an accident." My heart raced. "An accident? Is he okay?" For the first time, I saw a crack in Richard Park's steel facade. His shoulders relaxed slightly, and something like relief passed across his face. "He'll be fine. It was a car accident on his way here. Nothing serious, thank God, but enough to keep him in the hospital for observation overnight." "Oh my God," I murmured, feeling a mixture of concern and confusion. "But how did you know I would be here?" "How?" "Before they hit him, Daniel called me," Richard explained, his voice becoming softer. "He was desperate, saying he couldn't leave a woman waiting alone in the restaurant. He gave me your name, a description, and begged me to come here and explain personally." He paused, and for the first time, I saw something like a smile at the corners of his mouth. "My son can be many things, but he has honor. He couldn't bear the idea of you thinking you were abandoned." Unexpected tears stung my eyes. A man I had never met, injured in an accident, had thought of me. And his father, one of the most powerful men in the city, had dropped everything to come give me the news personally. "I don't know what to say," I admitted. Richard observed me for a long moment, his eyes scanning my face as if memorizing every detail. "Daniel told me about you a few days ago. He said your mutual friend convinced him to meet you, and that when he saw your photo, something in him just knew." My face flushed. He said that. He said you have kind eyes, Richard continued, and there was something strange in his voice now, an emotion I couldn't identify. And that you work in a library, surrounded by books and stories. He said you were different from all the other women he's met in his social life. The waiter returned, clearly surprised to see Richard Park at my table. Mr. Park, it's an honor to have you here. What can I bring for you? Bring your best wine, Richard said without hesitation, and 2 of the chef's main courses. The lady has waited long enough. He looked at me. Will you have dinner with me? My mind was spinning. I don't know if. Please, he said, and there was genuine vulnerability in that word that completely disarmed me. Let me make up for tonight's disappointment. And perhaps I can meet the woman who made my son smile for the first time in months. I should have stood up, should have politely thanked him and left. But there was something in Richard Park's eyes, something lonely and honest, that made me nod. All right, I agreed, but only if you tell me why this is so important to you. The following minutes were surreal. The waiter brought a wine that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and dishes began to arrive, each more elaborate than the last. But what really surprised me was Richard Park. Without his corporate armor, he was human, vulnerable. Daniel is my only son, he began, swirling the wine glass between his fingers. His mother passed away 3 years ago. Cancer. His voice trembled slightly. Since then, Daniel has shut down. He works at the company, fulfills his obligations, but it's as if a part of him died with her. I'm sorry, I said sincerely. My wife, Sujin, was the light of our family, Richard continued, his eyes distant. She was the one who kept Daniel balanced, who taught him about kindness and empathy. I was always too busy building the empire, traveling, doing business. She was the one who actually raised our son. He looked directly at me, and I regret every day not having spent more time with them. My heart tightened. Beneath the billionaire exterior, there was a grieving father and a widower full of regrets. Daniel started dating high society women after Sujin passed, Richard said bitterly. Women who wanted his money, his surname, his position. None of them cared about who he really was, and he knew it, but he continued, as if punishing himself. But he accepted this blind date with me, I observed. Why? Richard smiled, a genuine smile this time. Because your friend Yuna works in our human resources department. She's known Daniel for years and was tired of seeing him unhappy. She bombarded him with stories about you, about how you volunteer to read to children at the library on Saturdays, how you help elderly people use computers, how you treat each book as if it were a treasure. He paused, and she showed him your photo. I didn't know Yuna had done all that. Tears threatened to fall again. When Daniel saw your photo and heard about you, he called me that night, Richard continued. For the first time in 3 years, I heard excitement in his voice. He said, Dad, I think I need to meet this woman. She reminds me of Mom. I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. They silently streamed down my face. He said that. Richard nodded, his own eyes glistening. Sujin loved books. She always said that a person who loves stories has a rich soul. And when Daniel called me from the hospital today, even in pain, all he could say was, Dad, please don't let Marina think I don't care. Please, go to her. Can I meet him? I asked impulsively. At the hospital. Richard's expression softened completely. He would love that. But first, he extended his hand across the table. Finish this dinner with me. Let me get to know the woman who brought my son back to life. Over the next hours, we talked. About everything. Richard told me about Sujin. How they met when he was just a young entrepreneur with big dreams. How she believed in him when no one else did. How she kept him grounded while his empire grew. I told him about my humble childhood. About how my mother raised me alone after my father abandoned us. About how books were my refuge and eventually my vocation. You remind me of her, Richard said softly when dessert arrived. Sujin also had that kindness in her eyes. That quiet strength. When we finally left the restaurant, Richard insisted on taking me to the hospital. His driver was waiting for us in an impeccable black Mercedes, and during the ride, I felt a strange mixture of nervousness and anticipation. Does he know you're coming? I asked. I sent a message while you were in the bathroom, Richard admitted with an almost mischievous smile. He's anxious, and probably afraid that you'll hate him for this disastrous night." "How could I hate him?" I murmured. He was injured and still thought of me. St. Mary Hospital was an elite private facility, and Richard guided me through silent corridors to a private suite on the top floor. He paused at the door, his hand on my shoulder. "Marina," he said softly, "regardless of what happens between you and Daniel, I want you to know something. Tonight reminded me of what's important. You reminded me of the woman I loved and lost." His voice became hoarse. "Thank you for that." Before I could respond, he opened the door. Daniel Park was sitting on the hospital bed, a bandage on his forehead and his arm in a sling. But what struck me wasn't his injury, it was his eyes. They were exactly like his father's, but younger, warmer. And when he saw me, they lit up in a way that made my heart skip. "Marina," he said, his voice hoarse. "You came." "I came," I confirmed, taking hesitant steps toward the bed. "How are you?" "Better now," he replied, a shy smile playing on his lips. "I'm sorry about tonight. It wasn't exactly the dream date I planned." I laughed, feeling tears threaten again. "Well, it was memorable." Richard cleared his throat behind us. "I'll let you two talk. Daniel, I'll see you tomorrow." He looked at me. "Marina, it was a pleasure. I hope to see you again soon." After he left, a comfortable silence fell between Daniel and me. He studied me with curiosity and something more, something that made me blush. "Una didn't exaggerate," he finally said. "You're exactly as she described. Kind. Real. Your father told me about your mother," I said softly, sitting in the chair beside the bed. "I'm sorry for your loss." Daniel's expression became distant. "She was amazing. Always knew what to say, how to make everything better." He looked at me. "My father said you read to children at the library on Saturdays. My mother did that too. She said stories were the purest way to teach love." She was right, I agreed. Stories connect us. They remind us we're not alone. Daniel extended his good hand, and after a moment of hesitation, I placed my hand in his. His skin was warm, his grip gentle but firm. "I want to get to know you," he said, his voice loaded with sincerity. "Really? Not in fancy restaurants or social events. I want to know about your favorite books, what makes you laugh, your dreams." He squeezed my hand. "Can I do that? Can I have a second chance to get our first date right?" 3 months passed like a dream. Daniel kept his promise. Our dates were simple and genuine. We walked in the park, visited old bookstores, watched classic movies in small neighborhood cinemas. He showed me a side of himself that few knew, a man who loved poetry, who volunteered at a homeless shelter on weekends, who still kept handwritten letters from his mother. And Richard became a constant presence in my life. He often joined us for dinners, sharing stories of Sue Jean and listening attentively while I talked about my work at the library. He funded a new literacy program I had casually mentioned, insisting Sue Jean would have loved the idea. "You brought something back to me," he told me one evening, after Daniel momentarily left us to take a call. We were in his penthouse apartment, overlooking the illuminated city. "Something I thought I'd lost forever." "What?" I asked. "Hope," he replied simply. "Hope that my son can be happy again. Hope that our family can heal." He paused, his eyes meeting mine. "And perhaps hope for me too." There was something in the way he looked at me that moment, something that made me question feelings I had pushed to the back of my mind. In recent weeks, I had started to notice things about Richard. The way his eyes lit up when I entered the room. How he always remembered small details I mentioned. How his hand sometimes lingered on mine a moment longer than necessary. And to my shame and confusion, I had started to wait for those moments. "Richard," I began hesitantly, "you know that Daniel and I are dating," he finished for me, his voice tense. "I know, and he deserves you. He deserves all the happiness." But there was something broken in his voice that made my heart break. Daniel returned at that moment, oblivious to the tension in the room. "Sorry, it was the Soul Project team." He wrapped an arm around me, pulling me close. "Marina, I need to travel to South Korea next week. Business. I'll be gone for 10 days. "That's okay," I said, trying to ignore the fact that Richard had turned away, looking out the window with tense shoulders. That night, when Daniel drove me home, he was more hesitant than usual. At my apartment door, He held my hands and looked at me intently. "Marina, I need to tell you something," he began. "These 3 months have been the happiest of my life since my mother passed. You made me feel again. Made me believe I could have a life beyond work and obligations." My heart raced. "Daniel!" "But," he continued, and that word cut like a knife, "we need to talk when I get back from Korea. There's something I need to understand first. About myself. About us. Is everything okay?" I asked, feeling panic growing. He kissed my forehead gently. "Everything will be fine. I just need time to think." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "See you in 10 days. I watched him leave, a sense of dread settling in my stomach. The following 10 days were torturous. Daniel sent brief messages from abroad, but there was a distance in them that made me anxious. Yuna noticed my strange behavior and dragged me to a cafe after work. "What's going on?" she demanded. "You look miserable, and Daniel is in Korea acting strange too, according to the office people." "I don't know," I admitted, stirring my cappuccino. "He said we need to talk when he gets back. That he needs to understand something." Yuna frowned. "That's strange. You two seemed so happy." "We were," I said quietly. And then, before I could stop myself, the words poured out. "Yuna, I think I'm feeling something for his father too." She almost spit out her drink. "What?" "Richard Park." "I know it sounds crazy," I said quickly. "Daniel and I are dating, and I genuinely like him. But Richard, he's so lonely, so vulnerable beneath all that strength. And the way he looks at me sometimes." I put my face in my hands. "I'm a horrible person." "Hey, don't say that," Yuna said, her voice becoming softer. "Feelings are complicated. But Marina, you need to be honest with yourself and with them, before someone gets hurt even more." That night, unable to sleep, I decided to walk through the city. My steps led me, perhaps inevitably, to the Park Industries building. It was late, almost midnight, but the lights were still on at the top, in Richard's office. Before I could convince myself otherwise, I went inside. The receptionist security guard recognized me from the several times I had visited and let me go up. The executive floor was silent and dark, except for the light leaking from Richard's half-open office door. I walked slowly to it and stopped when I saw him. He was standing before the panoramic window, a glass of whiskey in his hand, looking at the city below. Even from behind, I could see the tension in his shoulders, the loneliness in his posture. "Richard," I called softly. He turned quickly, surprise crossing his face. "Marina? What are you doing here at this hour?" "I couldn't sleep," I admitted, entering the office. "And I needed to talk to someone." He placed the glass on his desk, his expression cautious. "About Daniel?" "About everything," I replied. "Richard, what's going on? Why is Daniel acting strange? Why are you here alone in the middle of the night?" He sighed deeply, running his hand through his gray hair. "Marina, you're a smart woman. I think you already know the answer." My heart started beating faster. "Then say it. Be honest with me." Richard stared at me for a long moment, an internal battle clearly waging behind his eyes. Then, as if a dam had broken, the words poured out. "I fell in love with you," he said, his voice raw. "Since that first night at the restaurant, when you looked at me not as a CEO or a billionaire, but as a worried father. As a human being." He took a step toward me. "I tried to fight it. God knows I tried. You're with my son. You make him happy. And I should be happy about that." "Richard, but every time I see you," he continued, his voice breaking, "I think of Sue Jean, of how she would make me feel. Seen, understood, loved. And you make me feel that way again, Marina. You make me want to be a better man, not just a successful businessman." Tears streamed down my face. "I feel the same way," I whispered. The confession hung between us, heavy and impossible. Richard froze, his eyes searching mine as if trying to determine if he had heard correctly. "What did you say?" His voice was barely a whisper. "I said I feel the same way," I repeated, my voice trembling. "And I've been hating myself for it. Daniel is wonderful. He's kind, thoughtful, and deserves someone who loves him completely. But my heart," I pressed my hand to my chest, "my heart keeps looking for you in every room." Richard closed his eyes, pain evident in every line of his face. "We can't do this. Not with Daniel." I know, I agreed, tears now falling freely. That's why I'm so lost. He opened his eyes and took a step toward me, then stopped, as if fighting a physical impulse to touch me. Daniel noticed, he said quietly. That's why he went to Korea. He felt the tension between us, saw the way we look at each other, and it's tearing him apart. My stomach churned. Oh no! He called me from Seoul last night, Richard continued, his voice heavy. He said he loves you, Marina, that he wants to build a life with you. But he also said he's never seen me as alive as in the last 3 months. He paused, and he asked me directly if I had feelings for you. What did you say? I asked, barely able to breathe. I denied it, Richard admitted, his voice full of shame. I lied to my own son because I couldn't bear the idea of hurting him. But he knew. He could hear the lie in my voice. He finally closed the distance between us, taking my hands. Marina, you need to understand. Daniel is everything to me. He's all that's left of Soo-jin, our love, our life together. I can't destroy his happiness, even if it means losing mine. I looked at our intertwined fingers, the warmth of his hands radiating through me. So what do we do? You choose Daniel, Richard said firmly, though his voice trembled. He's young, has his whole life ahead of him. He can give you a family, a normal life. I'm just an old man carrying ghosts. You're not old, I protested, and your ghosts are beautiful memories of real love. Richard, you're not being fair to yourself. He released my hands and walked away, returning to the window. Life is rarely fair, Marina. I learned that long ago. I watched his back, this strong and powerful man who carried so much weight alone, and something in me broke. I walked to him and, before I could think better of it, placed my hand on his shoulder. What if neither of us chose? I asked softly. What if we let Daniel decide what's best for him? Richard turned, surprise in his eyes. What do you mean? I mean we should be honest with him, I explained. Completely honest. About our feelings, about the situation. And then let him decide if he wants to fight for the relationship knowing the truth, or if he wants to set us free. I held his face between my hands. Your son deserves honesty, Richard. Not well-intentioned lies. What if he hates us? Richard whispered, covering my hands with his. What if this destroys our family? Then we'll face it together, I replied. But at least we'll face it with the truth. For a long moment, we stood there, forehead to forehead, breathing the same air. And then, inevitably, his lips found mine. The kiss was gentle at first, hesitant, as if we were both still trying to deny the inevitable. But then something broke, Richard's years of loneliness and my repressed need meeting in a perfect storm of emotion. His hands rose to my hair, pulling me closer, and I surrendered to the moment, knowing that, right or wrong, this was real. When we finally separated, we were both breathing hard. Richard rested his forehead against mine again, his eyes closed. I haven't done this since Soo-jin, he whispered. Haven't kissed anyone since her. I'm sorry if I wasn't. You were perfect, he interrupted, opening his eyes. You were perfect. And that's why this is so impossible. The sound of the office door opening made us jump. We turned quickly, and my heart stopped. Daniel was there, his suitcase still in hand, clearly having arrived directly from the airport. His face was pale, his eyes moving from me to his father and back, processing the scene before him. Daniel, Richard began, his voice breaking. I knew, Daniel interrupted him, his voice strangely calm. I knew, but part of me hoped I was wrong. He dropped his suitcase and entered the office, his movements controlled. I came back early because I couldn't wait, because I thought that maybe, if we talked, we could work this out. Son, please let me explain. No, Daniel raised his hand. Let me speak first. He looked at me, and there were tears in his eyes. Marina, I love you. Or at least, I love the idea of you. The idea of moving on, of finding happiness again. He swallowed hard. But in Seoul, away from you both, I realized something. I realized that the reason I was so excited to meet you wasn't just because you were special. It was because you reminded me of her, my mother. And I realized I was trying to replace what I lost. Daniel, I began, but he shook his head. And then I realized something else, he continued, now looking at his father. I realized you haven't smiled, really smiled, since Mom died. Not until Marina came into our lives. He took a step toward us. You fell in love with her, didn't you? Richard couldn't speak, just nodded, tears streaming down his face. And you? Daniel asked, turning to me. Do you love him? I looked at Richard, this man who had become so precious to me, who made me feel seen and valued in ways I had never experienced, and then back at Daniel, his son, who deserved honesty. Yes, I whispered. I'm sorry, Daniel. I never wanted to hurt you. To my surprise, Daniel laughed, a strangled but genuine sound. Don't apologize. Not when you found something real. He approached his father, placing a hand on his shoulder. Dad, you spent 3 years buried in work, punishing yourself for not spending enough time with Mom. Do you think she would want that? Do you think she would want you to be alone forever? But you, Richard began. I'll be fine, Daniel interrupted him firmly. I'm 31 years old, Dad. I'll find my own way, my own happiness. But you, he looked between us. You have a second chance to be happy. You both do. And I won't stand in the way of that. Are you sure? I asked, barely believing what I was hearing. Daniel turned to me, and for the first time that night, he smiled. A genuine, warm smile. Marina, when I first saw you in that photo, something in me recognized kindness. And that instinct was right. You're genuine, kind, and exactly what my father needs. He took my hand and placed it in his father's hand. Take care of each other. And maybe, when you have children, I can be the favorite uncle. Richard sobbed, pulling his son into a tight embrace. You're the most noble man I know. Your mother would be so proud. She would be proud of all of us, Daniel murmured, for choosing honesty, for choosing love. 6 months later, I was on the porch of the country house Richard had bought, a place away from the city, surrounded by gardens that reminded me of his descriptions of Sue Jean's favorite places. Daniel was there, along with Una and some close friends, as Richard and I exchanged simple vows under an arch covered with flowers. You brought me back to life, Richard whispered as he placed the ring on my finger. You taught me it's never too late to start over. And you taught me that love comes when we least expect it. I replied, and that sometimes the most unlikely path leads to the right destination. When we kissed, I heard Daniel clapping loudly behind us, and I realized that somehow, against all odds, we had found not just love, but a family built on honesty, sacrifice, and the courage to follow our hearts. Sometimes, the strangest blind dates lead to the most beautiful endings.